Egg pop. Um, I mentioned I have to go to work after this. Um, and my work computer's in the car, and there's a sticker across the front that says "What's next?" It is Jed Bartlett's line in the West Wing. That show is deeply important to me, and I appreciate you bringing him into the pulpit a little bit as well this morning. I'm not talking about love today. I guess I'm always talking about love in one way or the other. But it turns out I'm going to get up here and talk about darkness again. It just seems like the topic isn't quite through with me yet. But I say it with a smile. I don't think I'm bringing anything gloomy or doomy to you this morning. But I'm not just thinking about darkness. Today I'm also thinking about faith. I'm thinking about resilience, and I'm thinking about change. I'm thinking about this because, as many of you know, I'm leaving this job I'm up here complaining to you about that you're recording to probably put on YouTube, and that's okay. I'm leaving this job in just about 2 weeks. After a long time of being there, 8.5 years. And so that means there's a future in front of me that's tinged with more uncertainty than I've been used to in a little while. A little more of the unknown looming out there in the guess more in the foreground than the background than I'm used to. I also feel the need to have a squirrel moment and say every time I say unknown, as the parent of two small children, the way I want to sing that song from Frozen, just like belt it out. It's like, thank you, Zoe. I see the recognition. But this is my life. This is where I am in my journey at the moment. But I also know it's not just me. We are all living in a time when the future can be something that feels difficult to imagine. Looking ahead to what might come is a harder exercise than maybe it has been in the past. There is so much tumult, there is so much fear, there is so much that you can look out into the world and interpret as collapse, that attempting to imagine what life will be like in a year, let alone a decade, can feel almost impossible, or at best, just really, really uncomfortable. For many of us, mentally leaving the present and imagining a future where we're happier or more secure, or where some dream has been realized, can be a core coping mechanism. Ever since I was a kid, this is the primary way that I've gotten myself to sleep at night. I lay there and I pick some idea I have about my future and let my imagination run wild with how things could be if everything in this imagined future blossomed just as I hope. And the comfort that exercise brings me can lull me into sleep. So the question in front of me today, the question I'm putting in front of you is, what do we do when the future is this unclear? When the future isn't easy to imagine as a necessarily friendly place? When the present is something that we might long to change, yet we can't seem to anchor ourselves in a place that we want to go? This brings me to a memory. It was an evening in April about 9 years ago, and it was just around sunset. And I stepped out of my car after a 7-ish hour drive to the Gulf Coast. And I was immediately, as soon as I opened the door, greeted by the sound of waves that were hidden behind this towering wall of condos where we were getting set to stay. Ashley, my wife, and I lugged our bags up to our spot for the weekend, up the elevator, into the condo, and once we had the door unlocked, I just made a beeline through this small apartment to the balcony. And I shoved open that heavy glass door. You know, they seem like they're so much heavier than they look like they should be. And that wind hit me in the face. And there it was in front of me, exactly what I had driven all that way to see. The sun was setting over the Gulf of Mexico. Still the Gulf of Mexico. The water was glowing an emerald green. The clouds were streaked with orange. And the sound of the surf was so loud that any words that you spoke softly to yourself just disappeared, were swallowed up into the air. And the words that did manage to escape my lips that only I could hear were simple. Thank goodness. This was the week after my birthday, and just days after I had unexpectedly lost a job that had been deeply meaningful to me. It was a loss that had come out of nowhere, a big surprise. It was also about 6 months after an election you may remember that had felt like an earthquake in our country. It had been a year since Ashley and I had taken a huge leap of faith buying our first home, and that home renovation had taken more energy, more money than we had ever imagined. I was feeling fairly depleted. I was really, really tired. Everything at that time felt like it required more energy than I had. Decisions took longer. It felt like news or changes lingered in my body, like even small things carried weight. I remember moving through those days with a sense that I was constantly adjusting, like recalibrating, trying to find my footing again. It's hard to stay steady when the ground keeps shifting. It's hard to feel oriented when what used to feel dependable no longer does. I did not think that I was resilient at the time. I felt quite the opposite. I only knew that I was trying to keep going in a way that did not make things worse. I was trying to stay present without pretending that I understood where things were headed. At that time, outside of my family, that job had felt like a thing that I could count on. It was the place that felt steady, while the rest of the world seemed to tremble. And when that was taken away, I felt kind of paralyzed. I didn't know what to trust or what to hope for. It just felt like there was so much in the dark. There's that dark again. And this is why it felt like a miracle when Ashley suggested we drive down to the Gulf for a few days. It turns out her mom, who is a makeup artist, was working a wedding, so had a condo that was paid for, and she'd been there for the whole week. So why don't we just go? And I remember feeling such relief at the thought that in leaving, I could somehow find some answers. Like if I could just get away from the problems, then everything would become clear for me once I got there. I wanted to head toward the light, toward the waves, to a place where I could just be still. And when I finally stood at the shoreline, I realized that what I was chasing was a reminder that my own uncertainty was not the whole story, that there was always more. When I finally walked out into the waves, they were freezing. It was April, but I didn't care. I remember just standing there, like, feeling really, trying to feel really strong, but thinking, like, maybe I made a mistake. But the water was really, really cold. There's also a picture of me in this moment, standing knee deep in this cold water. I had my hands on my hips and I'm like gazing out. So Ashley has stayed on the beach and just took this picture of me. Still have it saved on my phone. I stood there and I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to wait for some sign, some clarity, some direction. Something will tell me what to do next. But of course, all I could hear was the wind and the water. And yet the sound, though, and the movement of the waves started to do its work. It didn't answer any questions. It simply reminded me that the world was still moving, still alive, still creating itself. And in that realization, something in me began to lose. The sense that I had to fix or understand everything before I could trust anything, thankfully, started to melt away. I also remember that on cloudy nights on that beach, it was pitch black. Like a night so inky that you can't see your hand when you put it out in front of your face until you blink a few times. But you could still hear the waves. You were still surrounded by that steady, sonic reminder that the unknown was not empty. Now, this image has felt especially close to home lately. When the ice storm hit a few weeks ago in Nashville, many of our neighbors, many of my friends and family spent well over a week without power, without knowing when the lights would come back on. Homes went dark in the freezing cold. Over those days, people waited uncertain, checking updates that offered no real answers. The darkness was tangible, immediate. It was frightening and it was exhausting. But also in that period, people opened their doors. Neighbors were checking on neighbors. Homes with heat took in those without. Meals were shared. Warmth was offered. That dark started to fill up with care and with presence. There were a couple of days where there were just a lot of kids at my house. But this matters. Resilience grows in relationship. It grows as we trust that creation is still unfolding and that we participate in how it unfolds for one another. So when the lights go out, no one can restore them by sheer will. Control is out of reach. Certainty is out of reach. But for the fortunate, connection remains. And that connection carries a warmth and a steadiness its own. Times like those have a way of teaching us the same lesson the ocean did, just in a different way, just closer to home. Instead of the waves teaching the lesson, it's the ordinary movement of care, the quiet ways life keeps working beneath our fear. The sound of the waves, and now of doors opening, and of neighbors moving toward one another. To me, this becomes a kind of prayer. A reminder that we don't have to imagine the worst case scenario, that we can imagine hope, we can imagine possibility, we can trust that something is there even when we cannot see it. In her book, Hope in the Dark, Rebecca Solnit writes that cause and effect assumes history marches forward. But history is not an army, she says. It is a crab, scuttling sideways. A drip of soft water wearing away stone, an earthquake breaking centuries of tension. That one image of a crab scuttling sideways has stayed with me. And if I think back to that beach trip all those years ago, I remember seeing them on the beach, moving quickly, purposefully, almost comically sideways. They had their own rhythm, their own direction, invisible to me, but surely clear to them. I could not tell what they were building or where they were going. I only knew they were alive, utterly committed to whatever work was theirs to do. Now, faith can look like that too, just like that crab. Not marching forward in a straight line, but scuttling sideways, working, moving, trying to make sense of things we cannot see. Now, it has been 9 years since that April evening. And to be honest, the tension of that time in the world almost feels like nothing now. But life has also kept unfolding. I got kids now, right? I didn't then. My children are 5 and 7, and they carry light with them wherever they go. They sing, they question, they create whole worlds out of cardboard and markers, or Minecraft when I can't get my kids' Switch out of hand. And watching them, I am reminded that creation does not wait for certainty. It doesn't even look for it. You just start making it happen. You just bring things to life. Because the unknown is not empty. It is alive. Alive with movement, with potential, with the slow, sacred work of becoming. Alive with all of us, still finding our way, even in the dark. And maybe faith, the kind that holds through fear, is not just something we build or practice. Maybe it's also something we can lean into. In those seasons when we're so tired. Maybe it's not about building, it's simply letting ourselves be carried by the tide of a world that is still being made. I do think about how tired I was on that trip and how heavy everything felt. But I also remember again how on the beach the night was so dark you couldn't see your own hand in front of you, and yet the waves kept their rhythm, unseen, unbroken, reminding me that even when I could not see what was there, the world was still moving. And I remember how the next morning, standing at the water's edge, I could see it all again. The edge of the ocean meeting the sky, the light shifting across the surface, the horizon stretching farther than my eyes can follow. What had seemed unknowable in the dark was just as vast and alive in the light. It had never stopped moving. And maybe that, for me, is what faith really is. Remembering that even in my exhaustion, creation has not stopped. That something larger than my fear is still unfolding. When I think about resilience now, I picture someone who can breathe again. Someone who doesn't have all the answers and can somehow still remain present. There is a kind of ease that comes when we stop trying to force clarity and allow ourselves to stand exactly where we are. That shift changes what's possible. Trust that life is still unfolding beyond what we can see brings a settling in the body. The mind does not have to keep scanning for disaster. The heart stays open a little longer. We remain available to one another, to our work, to the moment in front of us. And for me, that's how resilience and faith can feel at a spiritual level, a steadiness that grows from belonging to something larger than our fear, a willingness to keep moving when the horizon is unclear, carried by trust that movement itself is part of creation. Faith is the trust beneath our staying power. It keeps us from shutting down when the world feels unstable. It lets us keep showing up gently, imperfectly, still part of the unfolding. And when the darkness gathers again, may we remember the sound that steadies us, the water that keeps moving, the horizon still waiting to be found. Enough to trust, enough to rest, enough to begin again. Later this morning, as you go from this place, you'll return to a world that is still uncertain, still unfinished, still unfolding. And my hope is that you can carry with you a resilience that does not come from having all the answers, but from trusting that life is still moving. May you find steadiness in connection, in the hands that reach towards you and the hands that offer you, hands you offer in return. And when the path ahead feels unclear, may you remember that not all movement is visible and not all growth happens in the light. May you allow yourself to rest inside the larger work of creation, knowing you are part of it. May it be so.